Early September morning, as a light fog still blanketed the quiet streets of suburban Denton, Texas, the atmosphere suddenly shifted. Three unmarked SUVs silently glided into the end of Cedar Ridge Drive, parking in a V-shape in front of an old single-story house that everyone in the neighborhood considered as harmless as a rock. Neighbors peeked through slightly parted curtains, watching tactical-clad officers deploy around the dew-soaked lawn. Inside, Mark Devereux, the quiet-ceiling repairman who drank coffee every morning before heading to work, was slipping on his worn leather boots. When a sharp, authoritative knock echoed at 6:42 a.m., he set his mug on the table, his hand pausing briefly, but his face eerily calm. "Mark Devereux," an officer's voice rang out. "Irving Police, we have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the 1989 disappearance of Kate Alder." They say Mark's eyelid only twitched faintly, as if he'd known this knock would come, just not when. November 14, 1989. The golden glow of sodium lights stretched along the second-floor hallway of MacArthur Park Apartments as Kate Alder, 27, returned home after work. A neighbor saw her walk in, holding a paper bag, wearing a dark coat. From that moment, she vanished without a trace. Her apartment was lit but silent, the balcony door slightly ajar, the sofa shifted from its usual marks, small details investigators at the time deemed insignificant. For 30 years, the case sank like hundreds of other Texas disappearances, until a misfiled evidence box and an old balcony panel revealed a secret no one expected. What happened in apartment 2A that night? How could a man live among a community for 35 years while hiding his past behind his own walls? And why did a faint scream, heard by a witness in 1989, become the key to shattering the wall of silence? Before we dive into this story spanning over 3 decades, hit subscribe to catch every moment of this journey to delayed but never fading justice. The night of mid-November 1989, the early winter chill crept through the concrete rows of MacArthur Park Apartments, rendering the air strangely still. Golden sodium lights along the walkways cast hazy streaks onto the pavement, highlighting patches of thin fog hovering in the courtyard and draping the entire complex in a feeling both familiar and uneasy. Kate Alder, 27, returned after a long workday, carrying a paper bag with a few items, her coat hugging her against the biting wind whipping through the open-air hallway. A downstairs neighbor briefly glimpsed her disappearing toward the second floor, her steps light and hurried, the bag swaying slightly with her stride. That was the last image anyone recalled of Kate. She entered the building, vanishing past the familiar hallway corner, leading to apartment 2A without any sign of trouble. The next morning, Kate's chair at the office sat empty, a sticky note untouched on her desk, her phone ringing unanswered. At first, co-workers assumed she'd overslept or hit a minor snag, but as the day passed without a message or any sign of contact, an initial unease quickly sharpened into clear concern. Kate was never one to disappear without a word. By evening, her family, after countless unanswered calls, drove to Irving to check for themselves. The second-floor hallway, when they arrived, held an oppressive silence, broken only by the wind whistling through metal doorframes and the distant hum of an old elevator at the hall's end. They stood before apartment 2A, knocking, calling her name, straining for any sound from within, but were met with absolute emptiness, a silence that chilled the spine. The yellow light above the door illuminated their increasingly frantic expressions, while the door stood unmoving, like an impenetrable barrier between them and whatever might be happening inside. The apartment emitted no noise, no hint of movement, no shadow behind the thin curtains, and certainly no rational explanation for Kate's prolonged absence. The air grew thick, each breath from the family seeming to echo off the opposite wall. Waiting turned swiftly into an unspoken fear, for all they could sense was an unmistakable wrongness, clearer and heavier than any prior hunch. Standing in that cold hallway, under the weak golden light, and the growing sense that something had gone terribly awry in Kate's steady life, her family decided to call the Irving Police Department. Not because they had proof she'd been harmed, but because the intuition of those who knew Kate well enough told them this kind of silence was utterly unlike her. And so, a missing persons case officially began at that moment. When the missing person call reached the Irving Police Department, a patrol unit was dispatched to MacArthur Park Apartments almost immediately. They walked along the second-floor hallway under the cold golden light of ceiling bulbs, stood before 2A, and knocked firmly 3 times per protocol, calling Kate's name, then pressed their ears to listen for a few seconds. No footsteps, no faint rustle, no sign of anyone inside. An officer tried the handle, but the door was locked. After verifying details with the family standing nearby, they requested the building manager bring a spare key to check the apartment's interior. The sound of the key turning in the lock rang clear in the eerily quiet space, and as the door slowly opened, what appeared first wasn't the chaos typical of a rushed departure, but a scene so orderly, so fixed, that it made the patrol pause for a moment to observe closely. The apartment was fully lit in the living room and kitchen, cold white light spilling over a clean flat carpet with no drag marks or unusual indentations. The small dining table to the left remained untouched, chairs unmoved, the tabletop free of foreign scratches. The kitchen was so tidy, it barely showed signs of prior use. A neatly folded dish towel sat in its place, the counter spotless, no food crumbs, no half-used pots or pans. In many missing persons cases, haste or panic left clear traces, but here, what lay before them resembled an apartment cleaned that morning, not the home of a woman who returned and vanished soon after. The on-duty investigator, Lieutenant Harris, took a quick survey and immediately noted the first contradiction. If Kate had left willingly, there'd be signs of preparation, or at least hurried behavior, but this apartment bore none of those markers. The furniture was too neat, everything too quiet, as if time froze when Kate disappeared. His suspicion grew when his eyes landed on the balcony door at the far end of the living room. The sliding door was slightly ajar, a mere 2-centimeter gap. To most it might seem unremarkable, but to a trained officer, it triggered an instant red flag. It was a cold night, temperatures dropping sharply by evening, and Kate wasn't one to leave the sliding door open, per her family standing behind. Harris stepped closer, holding his hand near the gap to feel the cold breeze seeping in, then looked at the floor beneath. No leaves blown in, no dust swept along, suggesting the door was opened recently, not left ajar all night. Another officer checked the door frame, noticing the bottom edge was slightly off its track, as if forcefully pulled and realigned. No cracks, no major scratches, but enough to indicate the door had been manipulated. The apartment showed no disarray, yet its too perfect state made the scene more unnatural. If Kate left for personal reasons, she'd need her purse, car keys, coat, basic items, but here, everything seemed in its place. No suitcase, no bag taken. The only logical feeling the patrol noted in that moment was a young woman vanishing from such a still, clean, orderly space was problematic. Harris scanned the room, then signaled the team to step back, instructing the family to stay in the hallway, to avoid touching potential evidence. The apartment needed immediate sealing. He announced a preliminary lockdown of the scene, restricting access until the forensic team arrived later. There was no loud panic, but the taut silence of the family outside made each passing minute heavy. The police found no violent scene, but also no logical signs of intentional departure. They only saw a brightly lit apartment, silent, with a slightly open balcony door in the cold night, and a woman gone without a trace. Harris concluded on the spot, "This doesn't look voluntary." With that, the investigation officially began. As 2A was temporarily sealed, Lieutenant Harris ordered everyone to stay in the hallway, while he and another officer conducted a rapid second sweep, this time not just for an overview, but to pinpoint small details that could prove pivotal. He approached the kitchen, where the white light made the counter gleam unnaturally, as if unused before Kate's disappearance. On the counter, one item stood out, a clear glass cup, placed off-center toward the right edge of the sink. The family behind Harris immediately noted the anomaly. Kate's mother whispered that her daughter always placed cups by the sink's left side, a near-fixed habit. Harris leaned in, examining the cup's position, and the dried watermarks around it. No clear fingerprints, no condensation, but the cup's angle, tilted slightly outward rather than inward, felt like an interrupted action, not a routine placement. It proved nothing, but it clearly didn't align with the owner's usual behavior. From the kitchen, he turned to the living room, where the light still blazed, but starkly contrasted with the darkness of the bedroom down a short hallway to the right. The lit living room could be explained if Kate had just returned and hadn't turned off the lights, but the completely dark bedroom created an odd disconnect. Someone coming home from work typically flips on the bedroom light to change or set down bags. Here, the living room glowed while the bedroom remained pitch black, as if never entered. Harris took a few steps, circling the sofa to check for compression marks on the carpet. When he crouched, he noticed something else. The sofa's legs left faint block-shaped indentations, showing its original position was slightly left of where it now stood. Someone had shifted the sofa a small distance, not enough for a struggle scene, but enough to misalign the carpet marks. No torn fabric, no spilled items, but that few centimeter shift drew more attention than any chaos could. A subtle sign, not obvious to most, but suggestive someone had touched or sat on the sofa or used it for support while doing something recently. While Harris examined the sofa, the other officer called him to the balcony door area. There, near the 2-centimeter gap that initially raised suspicion, lay a small handkerchief on the floor. The pale gray cotton cloth, soft and barely wrinkled, was in an unnatural position, close to the edge of the sliding glass door, slightly overlapping the track below, as if it fell and stayed untouched by wind or footsteps. Kate's family confirmed the handkerchief wasn't where she'd keep it. She typically stored them in a drawer by her bed or in her purse. Its presence by the balcony door suggested someone used or held it and dropped it, or it caught on someone approaching the door. When Harris picked it up with gloved hands, he noticed one corner was slightly damp, not soaked, but as if sweat from a hand had seeped through during brief contact. No blood, no mud, but the handkerchief's mere presence formed a third piece misaligned with the meticulously tidy surroundings. Finally, as the two officers conducted a last sweep of the living room to identify items Kate might have taken if she'd left willingly, they noticed a critical absence: her car keys. Kate's car was still in the lot, but the keys weren't on the hook by the door, in her coat pocket, or in the small tray on the kitchen counter, 3 places she typically kept them. The keys' complete absence from the apartment created a serious paradox. To leave by car, Kate would have needed them. If she left without the car, the keys should have been somewhere in the house, but they weren't in any logical spot, and if someone entered the apartment, they'd have no need or reason to take the car keys over more valuable items. The missing keys raised a second possibility. Kate took them outside, but the car didn't move, so where did she go? Harris felt distinctly that this apartment resembled a stage wiped clean before the curtain fell, a place where everything seemed normal to mask some unsettling event. The investigator concluded that Kate's disappearance couldn't be attributed to a voluntary departure. The inconsistencies, the misplaced glass, the illogical lighting, the slightly shifted sofa, the handkerchief by the balcony door, and the missing car keys, painted a different picture. A second person was in apartment 2A the night Kate Alder vanished. Reconstructing the timeline of Kate's disappearance became the priority after the patrol completed their rapid apartment sweep. Lieutenant Harris knew that in sudden disappearances with scant physical evidence, the timeline was the backbone for piecing together scattered fragments. He stepped into the hallway, directing an officer to escort Kate's family to the separate building manager's office for statements about her daily habits, while he began gathering the last reliable time markers. From Kate's workplace, colleagues said she left the office around 6 p.m. Nothing unusual. She said goodbye as always, carrying a small paper bag with documents to review. No one noticed stress or unease in her expression or words. By around 8 p.m., colleagues began calling about work matters. None were answered. From then until Kate was last seen, all contact fell silent. Harris reviewed the gate camera, a grainy VHS typical of late 80s apartment complexes. Despite the blurry, dimly lit footage, they identified a woman in a dark coat entering through the main gate, moving quickly across the courtyard. Her face wasn't clear, but her build, gait, and the item in her hand matched the neighbor's description of seeing her seconds later at the building entrance. This confirmed Kate reached MacArthur Park around 8:10 p.m. The problem was, from that moment, The next 3 hours were a complete blank. No bank transactions occurred on Kate's cards, no cash withdrawals, no calls from the apartment. The landline in 2A recorded no outgoing calls after Kate returned. Her car remained untouched in the lot. No witnesses saw anyone with her or her leaving the building. It formed a suspiciously still space, as if time after 8:10 p.m. had been cut from reality. While reviewing resident statements, Lieutenant Harris noted a woman in apartment 2C who said that sometime mid-evening, she heard a sound like a sliding door slammed shut, or someone leaning into it with force. She wasn't sure of the exact time, only that it was after putting her child to bed, possibly near 9 p.m. Harris asked her to describe the sound, not a front door hitting its frame, but more like metal on metal, short and sharp, like a glass door track jolted suddenly. This sound became a key piece, as it aligned with the slightly open balcony door found during the police check, and the balcony door was directly under the vented railing outside 2A. If someone tried to slam the door shut, or leaned into it to hold it from outside, that clank would fit perfectly. More notably, this timing fell right in Kate's blind time window. To clarify, Harris reviewed other traceable building activities. No one used the nearby second-floor vending machine after 8:30 p.m. The elevator logged no trips from the first to second floor between 8 o'clock and 11 p.m. A man on the ground floor recalled that while retrieving his mail, he saw a man's silhouette leaning against the second-floor railing near Kate's area, but the figure was too dim to discern. This witness's impression also fell within the vaguest time frame, deepening the mystery of those 3 hours. Piecing together all markers, Harris built a composite timeline. Kate left work while it was still light, reached the complex after dark, entered the building without being followed or stopped, and after climbing the stairs, vanished from all traces. No phone signals, no sounds from the apartment, no car use, no one saw her leave, and no building activity suggested she interacted with anyone, except for an unusual metallic sound and an indistinct male figure. It was a timeline with too many gaps, and those gaps not only obscured the truth, but hinted that Kate didn't leave the building as someone normally would. Harris knew every time gap had a cause, and that cause lay hidden in something that happened in or around 2A during those 3 hours, when all traces went silent. After establishing the basic timeline for Kate's disappearance, Lieutenant Harris moved to the next step to narrow the investigation, canvassing all second-floor witnesses, especially those near 2A, where Kate was last seen. This floor was critical, as every sound, movement, or unusual presence could carry weight in the long enclosed hallway, with little noise, and only 5 adjacent apartments. Anyone moving during Kate's disappearance would have passed part of this hallway. The first person Harris approached was the woman in 2C, one apartment right of 2A. She'd reported that night about a sound like a door or metal clanking, but now Harris wanted details on what she heard before and after. When pressed, she recalled that minutes before the clank, she heard a low, deep male voice, brief and hushed, like someone saying a short sentence or signaling someone nearby. It was too faint to form clear words, just a low tone speaking a few words before stopping. She heard no female voice reply, no loud door slam, but the intrusion into the hallway caught her attention. She noted it wasn't a familiar voice from the floor, as residents here typically had higher, louder voices. Unlike usual sounds, this voice came from near 2A or 2B, though she couldn't pinpoint the exact spot. Leaving 2C, Harris went to 2D, across the hallway's corner, where an elderly man lived alone. He said that same evening, while opening his door for the newspaper and glancing at the railing, he saw a man's silhouette at the edge of the second floor, steps from 2A's entrance. The hallway's dim yellow light showed only a general shape, a man of average build, slightly broad shoulders, in a dark coat. His face was shadowed, with no distinct features, but what stood out was his posture, leaning slightly toward the staircase, as if waiting or listening for something below. When the man bent to look closer, the figure quickly turned, walked to the hallway's end, and vanished around the corner. It happened in seconds, but it felt off, as he'd never seen a man alone there at that hour. He wasn't sure of the exact time, but recalled it was after his TV's evening news, possibly aligning with Harris's needed time frame. Combining these first two statements, Harris noted a complication. One heard a low male voice near 2A, another saw a man lingering by the railing, but neither had a description strong enough to identify him. Yet both agreed this man's presence was unusual for a typical night. Things grew murkier with the third witness, a student at the hallway's end. She said she thought she saw Kate standing before 2B, across from 2A, as if in a tense conversation with someone. When pressed, she hesitated. She couldn't confirm it was Kate, as the flickering hallway light and shadows obscured details. She only recalled a woman near 2B, arms positioned as if crossed or holding a bag, facing a slightly taller man. But when Harris asked if she heard arguing or voices, she shook her head, saying it was a vague impression since she was rushing to take out the trash and didn't linger. Her account clashed with 2C, heard only a male voice, no female one. The three statements, low male voice, lone man's silhouette, and a possible tense exchange, each carried weight, but together they didn't form a cohesive sequence. They intersected like misaligned lines. One insisted on only a male voice, another saw a solitary man. The third suggested two people, possibly Kate and a man, facing each other. No clear common thread, only the presence of an unfamiliar man in three accounts, with no clear face. Harris stood in the second-floor hallway, eyeing each door and position described, trying to visualize the movements in the accounts. The investigator knew contradictions sometimes stemmed not from faulty memory, but from someone deliberately altering the story, or events unfolding too quickly for clear observation. In missing persons cases, conflicting statements often meant one of two things. Witnesses misremembered, due to lighting and stress, or one was intentionally skewing the image of the man in the hallway that night. Reviewing the rough position sketch he'd drawn, Harris didn't say it aloud, but his thinking clarified. The second-floor residents all heard or saw something, but one was hiding the most critical detail. That meant the man in the accounts wasn't random, and likely tied directly to the 3-hour gap when Kate Alder vanished without a trace. As the conflicting second-floor statements planted in Lieutenant Harris's mind that someone in this hallway knew more than they let on, he also realized human memory alone couldn't solve a disappearance like this. People forget, misrecall, or lie, but evidence doesn't. That night, he requested another team to thoroughly sweep the building's surroundings, especially the parking lot and entryways, since if Kate reached home and was never seen leaving, any trace between her apartment and car could be the missing link. The south parking lot, where Kate's white sedan sat untouched, looked like any low-rent complex lot, faded lines, old cars, oil-stained asphalt, but to an investigator, it was a wide canvas ripe with overlooked details. Harris directed the accompanying officer to scan each parking space, every stain, and any odd item on the ground near Kate's car with flashlights. The car doors were locked, no signs of tampering, windows intact, handles unscratched. Through the glass, the interior looked pristine, driver's seat in its usual position, passenger seat clear, dashboard showing no warning lights. Everything suggested the car hadn't been used since Kate parked it. But when the flashlight swept the asphalt near a metal dumpster at the lot's corner, a small glint caught the young officer's eye. He crouched, aimed the light closer, and called Harris over. Under the dumpster's base, near a nearby tire, was a metallic cluster, a keychain with a distinct car key, and a few smaller keys. Its position was deeper than a casual drop. It was nearly wedged between the dumpster's leg and the ground, a spot a key wouldn't roll to if simply slipped from a hand. Harris called for the scene photographer to document it from multiple angles: the key's orientation, distance from the dumpster's leg, proximity to the nearest tire, all meticulously recorded before anyone touched it. The key's presence there was a paradox. If Kate left intentionally, she'd have no reason to toss her keys out of reach, especially into a grimy crevice. If she was forced to leave, someone wanting to disable the car might tamper with the keys, but tucking them under a dumpster suggested a rushed, concealing act, not random. When the keychain was lifted with gloved hands and placed in a clear evidence bag, Kate's family confirmed it was hers. The car key with its black plastic grip, apartment key, mailbox key, all present. This twisted the picture further. If the keys were under the dumpster, Kate couldn't have driven away, and if she left without them, she couldn't return to use the car. This pushed the voluntary departure theory even lower in Harris's reasoning. He marked the dumpster's position on his sketch, feeling certain someone had tried to neutralize the car as part of their actions. While the lot team processed the keychain scene, another group rechecked the staircase from the first to second floor. This was the path anyone accessing 2A would take, unless they were a resident with a key living upstairs. The staircase was narrow, its white-painted walls yellowed, with a cold iron railing. At a landing corner where the ceiling light dimmed, a young officer spotted something small against the wall's base. It was a cigarette butt, half-burned, ash-cooled. The filter clearly marked Marlboro Lights. The filter's grip showed a faint yellow ring, suggesting recent use. Notably, Kate's family and colleagues confirmed she didn't smoke, and was bothered by cigarette odor. She had no reason to light a Marlboro and discard it on her building's staircase. The staircase wasn't a typical smoking spot, as the building's rules banned smoking in indoor hallways. Residents smoked in the courtyard or lot. A cigarette butt on the path to the second floor, near the time of Kate's disappearance, couldn't be dismissed as random litter. Harris collected it with specialized tweezers, placing it in an evidence tube, his mind linking it to the low male voice and the man's silhouette by the railing from the earlier statements. Someone had paused here long enough to smoke, or at least light and take a few drags, then discarded it on the spot. If they were just passing through and avoiding notice, smoking in a narrow staircase was odd. But if they were waiting, watching, or steadying themselves after an event, lingering in a dimly lit corner started to make sense. The hidden keychain under the dumpster and the Marlboro Light cigarette butt on the staircase were small details, individually easy to overlook, but when paired with the apartment's observations, the misplaced glass, shifted sofa, damp handkerchief by the balcony door, they began forming a broader pattern. This wasn't the story of a woman choosing to vanish from her life, but a space altered by someone after she lost control. Forensics started gaining traction in the investigation's reasoning. The concealment wasn't elaborate enough for a staged scene, but sufficient to reveal the rushed thinking of someone present that night. He didn't toss the keys into random bushes or take them. He tucked them in a close but obscure spot, under the dumpster near Kate's car. He didn't discard the cigarette butt in the courtyard, but left it in a relatively secluded area, the staircase to the second floor, where foot traffic was minimal. These half-hidden, half-revealed choices carried what Harris called an initial psychological signature, someone familiar with the building, aware of its spatial layout, but acting under time pressure and not calm enough to erase all traces. For the investigation, this was a small but clear turning point. From the moment the keys were lifted from the ground and the cigarette butt collected, the case ceased being a grown adult leaving home scenario. For the first time in the case notes, Lieutenant Harris used a more specific phrase over the radio to the station. "We have indications of outside interference." The signs were small but precise: physical, testable, comparable, traceable. And that's when the investigation began shifting from speculation based on accounts to a colder, more rigorous process: forensics. As the initial evidence pointed to possible outside interference in Kate's disappearance, Lieutenant Harris returned to the second floor with a clearer goal: identify who had the opportunity, timing, and suspicious behavior to become a primary investigative focus. Among the 5 apartments along this hallway, 2B, right next to 2A, stood out first, not due to direct evidence, but because in any confined space disappearance, the person next door is never ruled out early. 2B's door looked entirely normal, its brown paint unpeeled, metal number plate moderately shiny, no signs of tampering, no sounds from within. When Harris knocked the first time, no one answered. He tried again, harder, and finally heard slow, heavy footsteps, then the lock turning. The man who appeared was Mark Devereux, 27, brown hair, medium height, wearing an old t-shirt and faded jeans. The light from his apartment barely reached the threshold, most of the space dim. Harris explained the investigation and asked if Mark heard or saw anything unusual the previous night. Mark replied in a slightly hoarse, tired voice that he didn't pay attention to hallway happenings and was home all night. The statement sounded simple, but what Harris noted immediately was Mark's lack of details to confirm his presence in the apartment during Kate's disappearance. No one could verify he was there. No friends visited, no outgoing calls, no one heard a TV or music from his unit. Apartment 2B, as neighbors had confirmed earlier, was the floor's least active, with minimal comings and goings. Mark, a drywall ceiling repairman, working project-based contracts, had an irregular schedule, sometimes returning late, sometimes staying home all day. This made his home all night claim vague and hard to verify. Harris asked if Mark knew Kate or had spoken with her. Mark said they only exchanged hellos, nothing more. When Harris asked when he last left the apartment, Mark repeated, he didn't leave, didn't meet anyone, didn't do anything. The responses were short, flat, emotionless. To some, this might seem like indifference or annoyance at being questioned, but in investigative terms, it was a contentless, non-descriptive, unembellished statement, the kind often flagged for needs further verification. Leaving 2B, Harris immediately conferenced with the statement-gathering team. One re-interviewed witness was the young woman from the hallway's end, who'd mentioned briefly seeing two figures facing each other near 2B the night Kate vanished. She couldn't confirm the woman was Kate, but her description, a man about half a head taller, facing inward, while the other leaned slightly toward the wall, matched the area outside Mark's apartment with surprising precision when overlaid with the door's position sketch. When Harris asked about the man, she said he was slightly lean, in dark clothing, face unseen. This was the second time in hours that a tall, lean man in dark clothes appeared in second-floor residents' accounts. This, paired with the low male voice 2C heard near 2A, made Mark a natural focal point for the investigation. Another detail piqued Harris's interest. Mark's job gave him access to areas most wouldn't notice: ceilings, wall gaps, utility spaces, overhead wiring. Harris wasn't yet thinking anything specific, but in cases where victims vanish without clear traces, those with building structure knowledge warrant closer scrutiny. When the team re-examined the balcony door's height, the handkerchief under the track, and a small sample of ceiling dust found on the carpet near the sofa, Mark's profession began aligning with 2A's anomalies. Ceiling dust, especially from recent repairs or drilling, easily falls in tiny flecks and clings to clothing. A forensic technician had collected a few fine white grains on the sofa's edge, large enough for composition analysis. A drywall repairman, living next to the victim's apartment, became a correlation Harris couldn't ignore. The 2C resident's account of the low male voice also started matching Mark's vocal tone from his doorstep responses. The 2C woman didn't see the man's face that night, but recalled a distinct trait: a low voice, slightly drawn at sentence ends, clipped. This was exactly how Mark answered, "Did you see Kate last night?" A coincidence too striking to dismiss. Still, Harris knew these signs were fragments without edges, not yet forming a true suspect's profile. The task now wasn't to conclude hastily, but to keep Mark as suspect number one, monitor his statements, compare behaviors, and continue linking physical evidence, the keys under the dumpster, Marlboro light butt, shifted furniture, with anomalies around 2B. If Mark was truthful about not leaving, someone else lingered near 2B when Kate vanished. But if he lied, that hallway wasn't just Kate's last sighting. It might be where they confronted each other in unwitnessed moments. Though not enough to charge Mark, Harris wrote 3 words at the top of the file: primary suspect, 2B. Of all the second-floor doors, only 2B opened a viable investigative path. The focus on Mark Devereux as the primary suspect hadn't fully solidified into a unified direction when, the next morning, new information from a ground-floor resident forced Lieutenant Harris to pause all assumptions tied to initial leads. A man from 1A reported that, on the night Kate vanished, he saw a woman resembling Kate leaving the building around 9:40 p.m. Per his account, she wore a dark coat, had shoulder-length hair, and walked quickly, as if in a hurry. He insisted the courtyard light clearly lit her face, and he believed it was Kate. This immediately threw the investigation into confusion, contradicting nearly everything Harris's team had built in the timeline. If Kate left then, the gate camera, despite poor quality, should have captured someone passing. But reviewing the tape from 9:30 to 10 p.m. showed nothing, no woman exiting the complex. The footage flowed steadily, showing only a few late returning men, a resident walking a dog, then, nothing else. No woman, no figure matching Kate. Harris couldn't dismiss this account, but couldn't accept it unverified. If the witness misremembered, that was one thing. If he was mistaken or deliberately misreported, the case's complexity would spike. Moreover, this account created a new gap. If the man was right, someone ensured the camera missed that woman. If wrong, why did he recall the time and description so vividly? While the team re-interviewed, another group swept the dumpster area and rear fire escape for additional evidence tied to the keys found under the dumpster the previous night. They discovered a trash bag discarded out of schedule, appearing after the building's daily pickup. The waste collector confirmed the bag wasn't there that afternoon. It emerged at night or early morning. When technicians opened it, they found a pair of pale blue rubber gloves, the kind used for cleaning or painting. The gloves had no blood, no clear drywall dust, no strong chemical odor. DNA swabs inside yielded no clear results, either insufficient skin cells, multiple turnings inside out, or the wearer was meticulous enough to leave nothing. The absence of DNA was itself unusual. Handheld items typically retain some skin cells, but these gloves were almost pristine. Harris found this cleanliness unnatural, even suspicious. Did the wearer intentionally leave nothing, or were these new gloves tossed to mislead? Meanwhile, another officer rechecked the staircase where the Marlboro light butt was found. A few steps below, near a paint-streaked wall, he spotted a faint shoe print on the concrete. Not a full print, just the toe's curve, likely dirt or dust pressed when someone stepped and pivoted. Compared to residents' shoes, none matched. The print's size suggested a men's shoe, but the mark was too faint to identify brand or sole type. What caught the technician's eye was the print's direction facing inward, as if the person was heading up to the second floor, not down. This suggested two possibilities. The man was a second-floor resident, or an outsider who arrived and left another way. But if he didn't use this staircase to leave, which did he use? The west staircase was lit all night, hard to hide. The elevator logged no activity. The fire escape had an alarm if opened. No similar prints appeared on other staircases. This made the shoe print both valuable and puzzling. As Harris laid out the three new clues, the woman reportedly seen leaving, but absent from cameras, the oddly clean rubber gloves in the trash, and the faint unmatched shoe print, they didn't converge on one story, but split into three diverging paths. If 1A's account was true, Kate left alone, but then the keys under the dumpster made no sense. If the gloves were used to hide traces, why not dispose of them more thoroughly? And the shoe print, on the staircase to 2A, with no matching prints in the hallway or near Kate's door, meant what? A typical missing persons case has converging clues, traces aligning, telling a clearer story with each step. This case did the opposite. The more they found, the more things diverged. A witness saw Kate leave, cameras said no. The trash bag held gloves, suggesting trace concealment, but the gloves were too clean. The shoe print hinted at an outsider, but no follow-up prints led to or from. Harris quietly realized one of two things was happening. Either this was an exceptionally complex disappearance, with coincidences causing natural contradictions, or someone was deliberately creating noise, adding stray details to the scene to confuse the police. With the volume of contradictions piling up in under 24 hours, the second possibility began to warrant serious consideration. The conflicting evidence, scattered traces, and mismatched accounts should have elevated Kate Alder's disappearance to high priority in its first days. But sadly, in 1989, with the procedures and context of the time, things went the opposite way. After compiling the initial report, the lead investigator that night, Sergeant Vaughn, made a controversial call. There was no clear evidence of violence in 2A. His initial observations noted the anomalies. The sofa shifted a few centimeters, the handkerchief by the balcony door, the misplaced glass, as not strong enough to prove a struggle or coercion. He deemed them uncertain, possibly from Kate or prior household arrangements. With no blood, no clear foreign fingerprints, no broken furniture, and no witnesses to a violent conflict, Vaughn argued foul play couldn't be concluded from vague furniture layout issues. He also noted that an adult could leave their apartment without notifying anyone. In the late 1980s, when adult missing persons protocols weren't tightly standardized, this pushed Kate's case into a gray area of investigative judgment. But there was another factor rarely mentioned in the case file. The night Kate disappeared, the Irving PD's investigative unit was stretched thin due to an armed assault that injured 2 people on the city's east side. That incident was deemed more severe, requiring more manpower and putting direct pressure on command. As a result, though Harris thoroughly documented the anomalies in the apartment, his report was submitted at a time when the command staff's attention was focused on a higher priority case. Lead investigator Vaughn, tasked with coordinating both events that night, reviewed Kate's file quickly, relying almost solely on the apartment's condition and the absence of struggle signs. Faced with multiple overlapping cases, Vaughn opted for the cautious, less invasive approach, classifying Kate's case as missing adult non-suspicious circumstances. When a case is labeled non-suspicious, the consequences are significant. It effectively halts deeper investigation, no warrants for expanded searches, no sampling of minor suspicious points, no mandatory alibi checks for residents, no repeated gate camera reviews, no rigorous witness interviews. At the time, Irving PD lacked the modern forensic protocols that became standard post-2000, collecting small samples like ceiling dust, cigarette butts or fabric fibers wasn't routine. In other words, everything uncovered in the 2020s could have been identified on the night of November 14, 1989, but back then, it didn't happen. Harris, despite sensing the scene's irregularities firsthand, was bound by his superior's decision. He proposed shifting the case toward an external interference investigation, but Vaughn rejected it, citing insufficient grounds. At the time, confirming foul play required clearer signs, blood, injuries, broken items, forced entry marks, or witnesses seeing the victim dragged away. Kate's case had none of these strong indicators by old standards. Thus, the initial investigation report concluded, no evidence of violence or crime, the possibility of the victim leaving voluntarily cannot be ruled out. That was the case's biggest mistake. Within days of being classified as a missing adult, Kate Alder's file was relegated to passive monitoring, meaning police would only act on new information, but not actively investigate further. No one cross-checked camera footage frame by frame, no one archived the cigarette butt, no one analyzed the faint shoe print, no one thoroughly examined the gloves, no one re-interviewed witnesses the next morning. The scattered pieces Harris collected, when reassembled 30 years later, formed a clear framework of foul play. But in 1989, they were dismissed as noise, insignificant details. Reflecting in the early 2000s, as modern forensics became standard, Harris called the failure to escalate the case within the first 48 hours a fatal cut that derailed the entire investigation. In unexplained disappearances, the initial hours are golden. A single misjudgment was enough to lock the truth away for 3 decades. Apartment 2A was a scene waiting to be read correctly, but it was misread entirely, and that misstep led to 30 years without answers. As time passed, the scattered clues gathered the night Kate vanished never developed into a clear investigative path. After Sergeant Vaughn declined to elevate the case to foul play and categorized it as missing adult, non-suspicious, all the suspicious details Harris noted were reduced to isolated lines in an internal report. No body, no clear violence, no corroborated witness accounts of Kate being taken. All this made the case hard to define, not enough to open a murder investigation, but no foundation to confirm a simple runaway. This gray ambiguity pushed the case into the worst possible outcome, treated as a traceless disappearance where she might come back. In the following days, police continued checking Kate's bank for account activity. There was none. No cash withdrawals, no card swipes, no account logins. Typically, involuntary adult disappearances, or even kidnappings, there's at least one financial irregularity: spending, withdrawals, or someone attempting access. But with Kate, everything remained eerily still. Ironically, this absolute stillness was a double-edged sword for police. It wasn't enough to confirm a crime. For her family, it was clear proof Kate didn't leave willingly. But 1989's legal framework didn't allow opening a criminal case based solely on intuition. Meanwhile, resident statements kept emerging, muddying the case further. One claimed seeing a woman like Kate leave the building. Another insisted no woman passed by. Someone heard a man's voice. Others saw two people arguing. Some heard nothing. The contradictions weren't just in the accounts, but in how each witness asserted their memory's certainty. Harris tried consolidating everything, but the more he pieced together, the more fractured the picture became. No statement was strong enough to rely on, and none could confirm details beyond doubt, the reasonable doubt threshold for criminal investigations. In the following weeks, police searched around the apartment complex, routes Kate might have taken, and nearby brush areas off the highway. No new clues, no personal items, no clothing, no body, no witnesses outside the complex. Nothing. A no-body case in 1989 was nearly an insurmountable wall for investigators. Even with a potential suspect like Mark Devereux, no body meant no proof of a crime, no time of death, no direct link to violence. Texas law, in the late 1980s, hadn't yet expanded the murder definition to allow prosecutions without a body, as it would post-2000. The case stalled not for lack of suspicion, but for lack of a piece then deemed essential. Bank records froze. Phone records froze. Statements conflicted. Witnesses didn't align. No strong physical evidence. No cameras captured anything beyond Kate entering the building. No clear alibis, but no compelling signs to conclude Mark or anyone committed a crime. This pushed Kate's case into an investigative dead zone. Similar disappearances in that era typically only expanded with new discoveries, bodies, items, or strong witnesses. For Kate, none materialized. By the second month's end, an Irving PD internal committee reviewed the case's progress. The report concluded, no clear evidence of a crime, no victim activity indicating immediate danger, no new leads. From then, Kate Alder's case was officially deprioritized. Officers were instructed to keep the file open, but not allocate further resources unless public tips emerged. Months later, with no new signs, the file was administratively closed. Cold case file #891114KA. It was stored alongside dozens of other 1980s missing persons cases, each labeled pending resolution. For Harris, who still believed 2A was the scene of something wrong, closing the file didn't end the case. It was a silent pause, signaling all doors were locked. Per protocol, once classified as a cold case, it fell into prolonged silence. No one could touch it without new developments. That silence lasted not 1 or 2 years, but 30. 30 years during which Kate Alder's disappearance faded into shadow, buried under procedure, investigative errors, and pieces that should have been seen correctly from day one. The early 1990s passed in a chilling void for Kate's family and anyone still following the case. Each summer came and went. Each Texas storm swept through Irving. Each time MacArthur Park Apartments got a fresh coat of paint, Kate Alder's file remained untouched in the cold case drawer, gathering a thin layer of symbolic dust for each unanswered year. After the file closed in late 1989, active investigation virtually ceased, save for sporadic procedural inquiries. No one reported seeing Kate in Dallas, Houston, Fort Worth, Austin, or anywhere in national databases. No calls matched her description. No reports of someone resembling Kate. No unidentified bodies fit her profile. She vanished completely, as if swept off the earth the moment she entered the second-floor hallway that night. In the first 2 years post-disappearance, Kate's family relentlessly pressed police to expand searches, but each effort mirrored the last: checking main roads, scouring vacant lots, querying hospitals, churches, women's shelters, and homeless gathering spots. All returned to square one. No one had encountered anyone matching Kate's description. No one recalled meeting a lone woman seeking refuge. No one had even the smallest implausible tip. Local TV occasionally re-aired Kate's case in missing persons recap segments, but no significant calls followed. This wasn't because Kate went unnoticed, but because she vanished too perfectly, leaving no trace to follow. Police also cross-checked Kate's case with unidentified bodies in surrounding counties. Back then, matching was manual, comparing build, height, distinguishing marks. But all unidentified female remains in the area didn't match. None had Kate's wrist birthmark, her orthodontic work, her 5'6" height, or chestnut hair as described. Year after year, more remains surfaced in Dallas's outskirts, but none fit, and Kate's name stayed on the missing list, not shifting to deceased, a list families dread seeing loved ones on, yet once there, have no idea how long they'll wait for closure. Searches dwindled over the years. By 1993, the case lived only in Kate's family's memory and Harris's notebook, who still believed something was deeply wrong in 2A, but lacked authority to reopen it. He'd moved to another unit, but Kate's file stayed in his desk drawer, a non-assigned burden he kept as a professional debt. Then, in 1994, a critical but then unvalued detail emerged. Mark Devereux left Irving. Per internal migration records, he moved out in late spring, returned his 2B keys, cleared his belongings in one day, and left the city. No one knew where he went. Lease agreements didn't require a forwarding address, only move-out notice. The landlord noted Mark caused no trouble, left the place clean, and his name vanished from MacArthur Park's resident records. Police weren't notified, as Mark was never an official suspect. He was merely listed as needing further information in the initial report. No legal basis existed to monitor or track him. Like many workers then, Mark could relocate anywhere as a drywall repairman, without leaving a significant trail. At the time, no one thought Mark's departure was notable. But 3 decades later, when forensic files were revisited, it became a pivotal detail. The man next to the victim's apartment, with the vaguest statement, the least verifiable schedule, matching a witness's voice description, left Irving just years after the disappearance. If someone wanted to sever ties to an unsolved case, leaving the scene was the easiest way, and Mark did exactly that. Throughout the 1990s, no new clues prompted a review of Kate Alder's case. No forensic breakthroughs, DNA wasn't advanced, no CODIS database existed, no new witnesses, no confessions, no additional evidence. Each passing year made the file harder to access, not just due to time, but antiquated storage, papers yellowed, scene photos faded, verification documents partially lost. By the late 1990s, Kate's case had nearly faded from public memory. It no longer appeared on TV programs. Newspapers stopped mentioning it. New MacArthur Park residents were unaware of the story. Even longtime residents only vaguely recalled a woman who once disappeared here. Kate Alder's file entered its 10th year in complete stasis. No new leads, no impetus for re-investigation, no one assigned to pursue it. With Mark Devereux's quiet departure, unknown at the time to be central to all answers, the 1990s closed as a wholly frigid chapter of the case. A 10-year void without a single spark. Entering the early 2000s, Irving grew rapidly, adding new neighborhoods, and the police force saw frequent personnel changes. Old long-dormant cases, typically only reopened with new developments, or when a young driven investigator took notice. And it was such a chance event that shifted Kate Alder's case into a new phase, not due to new evidence, but because someone read the entire file with fresh eyes, untainted by the 1980s missteps. That person was investigator Sam Rourke, newly assigned to the investigations unit in 2002. During a routine review of long-standing missing persons cases, Kate Alder's name landed on a list of potentially overlooked cases needing priority reassessment. At the time, Rourke knew little about the case beyond its initial summary. 27-year-old woman missing. No signs of violence, no body, no leads. But when he pulled the file box from storage, a worn cardboard box with creased edges, he immediately noticed something off. The paperwork was significantly sparser than other missing persons cases from the same era. With just a few years of experience, but a meticulous approach to file procedures, Rourke was used to complete case files including initial patrol reports, witness interview transcripts, scene descriptions, evidence collection records, cross-reference system data, event timelines, and daily summary reports. But Kate's file lacked most of these, or more precisely, it had them, but major portions were missing. Rourke started with the second-floor witness list. The 1989 Maine report noted 3 interviewed witnesses, 2 C resident, 2 D resident, and a young person at the hallway's end, but the file contained only 2 faint photocopies, and a brief handwritten note, doesn't recall clearly, heard nothing, didn't see face clearly. What caught Rourke's attention was that one photocopy was torn, missing its right corner, meaning detailed content was gone. In the torn photocopy, the writer noted, heard arguing, unsure if man or woman, coming from 2A or 2B, but the lower section with timing, certainty level and voice description, was entirely absent. Rourke flipped the page, hoping the torn piece was loose in the box, but found nothing. He checked secondary document bags, nothing. Checked auxiliary file pouches, still nothing. The original was completely gone. Out of caution, Rourke called the storage facility again, to confirm if supplemental files were separated from the main box. The archive manager, a staff member since the late 1980s, said Kate's file was reorganized. In 1994, during a storage system upgrade to new cabinets, and some originals might have been photocopied and placed in new boxes, with originals discarded or lost during the transition. This was common in the early 1990s. Many old files were mishandled due to overloaded archives, but this meant critical details about one witness, the only one reporting an argument, were lost from the file. To Rourke, this was no minor issue. An argument was among the earliest signs of potential foul play, and now, that sign existed only as a blurry, incomplete photocopied fragment. He cross-checked the witness list with the 1989 building resident roster, and found another notable detail, the young woman at the hallway's end, who reported seeing 2 people near 2B, moved out in 1990. The file had no follow-up contact info, no new address, no phone number. This made re-verifying her statement impossible. Rourke moved to the evidence report. Here, the situation was worse. The Marlboro Light cigarette butt was simply noted as a cigarette stub collected at the staircase, with no storage identifier or evidence item number. It was unclear if the stub was retained. In the 2002 system, no evidence code matched this description. This meant the cigarette was either discarded or never properly logged. The only item potentially holding DNA from a person of interest was lost. Rourke sighed. This wasn't a small error. It was a severe forensic process failure. Finally, he reviewed Lieutenant Harris's 1989 initial assessment. Harris clearly wrote, "The apartment shows minor but inconsistent signs with the victim leaving voluntarily." But the official report from lead investigator Vaughn concluded, no signs of violence, no evidence of foul play. Comparing the two, Rourke realized Harris's report wasn't factored into the final decision. Only Vaughn's was retained in the main file. This meant Harris's cautious perspective was entirely buried by the administrative machinery of the time. Rourke, with a more modern investigative mindset, understood these losses were grave. In forensics, missing information is never neutral. It always signals investigative missteps. He compiled a list of potential foul play connectors and noted the low male voice, the man's silhouette, the argument, the ajar balcony door, the shifted sofa, the keys under the dumpster, the cigarette butt unmatched to residence, all pointed to external interference. Nothing supported Kate vanishing willingly. Upon completing his review, Rourke stamped a recommendation: case potentially involves foul play, recommend reclassification and department-level investigation. This was the first time in over a decade that Kate Alder's file was marked with 2 words it should have carried from the first week: foul play. The case wasn't fully reopened, but from that point, it shifted from a forgotten file to a suspected criminal case, placed on a priority review list whenever new technology or connections to similar cases emerged. In other words, for the first time since 1989, the truth about the night Kate vanished was no longer completely buried. Entering the 2010s, Criminal Investigation and Forensic Science in Texas had entered a new era. This was when photo restoration, microanalysis, and software-based scene simulation became standard CSI tools. For many cold cases, old film photos, once merely illustrative, became data mines when rescanned at high resolution. And this is how Kate Alder's file, thought lost to history, gained a flicker of hope when a young technician, Lena Ortiz, decided to digitize scene photos in the archive. Lena received Kate's file box as part of a list of long-standing missing persons cases requiring photo scanning for a new digital management system. Opening the photo envelope, she found faded film prints, living room, kitchen, hallway to the bedroom, balcony door, and a few angles shot by 1989 technicians without clear purpose. Initially, they resembled hundreds of old photos scanned daily, blurry, yellowed, grainy, poorly lit, but when Lena ran them through restoration software and adjusted contrast, she paused after the first frame. The 1989 living room photo showed the sofa slightly shifted right from its clear carpet indentations. When Harris noted this in 1989, it was deemed not strong enough to suggest a struggle, but when Lena magnified the carpet 300% and sharpened it, she saw something else. The sofa's leg indentations weren't just off by centimeters, they overlapped in two positions. This meant the sofa was moved at least twice, in different directions. One indentation was crescent-shaped, the other straighter. In modern forensics, overlapping furniture marks are a micro-displacement, often seen when heavy objects shift due to external force, not homeowner redecoration. Lena noted evidence of unintentional movement, possibly due to struggle. She moved to the balcony door photo, originally showing a few centimeter gap, but software simulating door movement based on angle, lighting and reflections revealed a 1989 overlooked detail. The gap's direction didn't match the average wind direction. On November 14, 1989, weather data recorded a northeast wind, blowing diagonally into the building's front. If wind opened the door, the gap should have leaned left, but the photo showed the opposite, a highly subtle detail, only clear through modern simulation. This meant the door didn't open naturally, it was pulled and partially closed by someone. But what struck Lena most was the living room's left wall. In the 1989 photo, it looked normal, a flat white wall, slightly dark on film. But when rescanned at high resolution and enhanced with local brightening algorithms, a faint crescent-shaped mark appeared, like a hard object struck it and was wiped. The mark wasn't random dirt, it had fading edges, consistent with an impact from a curved small object. A seasoned technician later confirmed, this is typical of marks from a head or shoulder hitting a wall, or a rounded object, like an arm or elbow, striking hard. The 1989 file had no record of a wall mark. No witnesses reported violence. No one heard loud noises, except one noting a clank at the railing. No items were broken. This led the 1989 lead investigator to rule out a struggle. But 2010's forensics told a different story. A struggle occurred, but it was minimal, lasting seconds, in a low-visibility spot, and quiet. A covert struggle, common when a perpetrator aims to subdue a victim quickly in a confined space without noise. When Lena compiled all photos, she identified three key points. 1. The apartment's furniture didn't stay still, it was adjusted post-incident. 2. The balcony door didn't open naturally, there was pull-push action against the wind. 3. The wall impact mark was completely missed in 1989. Together, these weren't the vague details Vaughn described. They were physical evidence of a low-level struggle, enough to reshape the case's perception. Lena sent her report to the cold case unit. Senior investigator Terry Molina reviewed the analysis and immediately ordered a cross-check. Could the marks be from cleaners, from Kate accidentally, from police shifting items at the scene? But comparing with Harris's initial scene description, meticulous and detailed, Molina found the sofa displacement and wall mark absent from the report. This didn't mean they didn't exist, it meant 1989 lacked the technology to detect them. Molina's preliminary conclusion: if a struggle occurred, it was extremely brief, highly covert, and likely between the victim and someone familiar with the apartment's layout. This redirected suspicion to its 1989 origin, apartment 2B, where Mark Devereux lived. If a struggle caused no major disruption, only enough for a wall scratch and slight sofa shift, it likely happened near the balcony door, with the advantage party being someone strong, quick and adept in tight spaces. Another point caught the modern forensic team's eye: the crescent wall mark aligned with an average man's shoulder height, not too high, not too low. If Kate was pressed against the wall, this could be where her shoulder or back hit before she was subdued. 2010's forensics couldn't say what happened, but it revealed what 1989 missed: a physical altercation occurred in 2A. Not accidental, not self-inflicted, caused by another person. This photo analysis was the first step in making the cold case team realize Kate Alder's disappearance wasn't natural, but possibly a skillfully concealed attack. It also laid the groundwork for later, when DNA forensics were applied, for the truth to finally emerge. The new tech photo analysis rekindled the cold case unit's interest, but the real shift came when a seemingly routine task, reinventorying old evidence, unlocked a door no one knew still existed for 3 decades. It began in 2019, when the Irving Police Department launched a plan to digitize all pre-2000 stored evidence. Boxes stacked in the archive, many so old their labels had faded, were to be inspected, recoded, and reclassified per modern forensic standards. During the August inventory, evidence technician Martin Ellis, a warehouse veteran since 1995, found a faded brown cardboard box misaligned in row 14 out of numerical order. Per the log, shelf 14B should hold evidence from a minor 1992 theft, but the box there bore a mismatched code. Its label was so faded, it was barely legible, showing only 14 and a hyphen. Martin pulled it out, noting it was heavier than typical theft case boxes, and upon opening it, he knew it didn't belong to this row's files. Inside were 4 evidence bags sealed with old brown tape used only in the 19. Each bore a code: KA14B01, KA14B02, KA14B03, KA14. The KA stopped Martin cold. It was Kate Alder's case identifier, used before year-based coding standardized. This meant the box was part of Kate Alder's file, but had been misplaced for at least since 19. And because it was out of place, it was never touched during the 2000s case reviews. Martin called Lena Ortiz and investigator Molina from the cold case unit. When they arrived at the warehouse, all eyes were on the 4 evidence bags in the box, not because they were large or obvious, but because their very existence revealed something horrific. In 1989, someone collected them, but they were never properly analyzed, never even entered into the official forensic coding system. This meant that for 30 years, 4 pieces of evidence potentially containing DNA, fabric traces, or skin cells, things modern forensics could unravel, had been forgotten in a dark corner of the warehouse. Molina opened each bag carefully, using gloves and specialized tools. First item: a 3 cm blonde hair. The hair was wrapped in old wax paper, faintly labeled, collected near sofa base. The 1989 investigator didn't specify why it was kept. It wasn't Kate's. She had chestnut hair, and no witness described a blonde man. But this difference gave the item weight. If it wasn't Kate's, whose was it? A modern forensic technician knew that even after decades, a few cells on the hair could yield DNA. Second item: a Marlboro Light cigarette butt. This was the item vaguely noted in 1989, but later untraceable. In bag 14B, the filter remained intact, partially burned paper, even a faint bite mark. If collected that night, it hadn't been discarded, just misplaced from the main file. Kate didn't smoke, and second-floor residents interviewed said they didn't use Marlboro Lights. For 30 years, this was one of the only items likely containing DNA from a man on the staircase that night. Third item: a small torn denim fragment. The bag noted, collected at balcony door track. The dark blue fabric, with thick threading, matched denim used in workers' jeans, like those of repairmen or drillers. This became especially significant when the cold case unit paired it with Mark Devereux's file, a drywall repairman who often wore workers' jeans. Fourth item: a sweat-stained tissue. The final bag held a thin, crumpled, but not ruined tissue with dried sweat marks. No clear note on who collected it, but the balcony door label reminded the unit of the handkerchief Harris found near the track. This could be a different item, or the same one collected that night. The tissue almost certainly held DNA if preserved well, and this bag showed it was kept dry, free of mold. As Molina laid the 4 items on the meeting room table, a glance told him these could be the final link between 1989 and modern forensics. But what the team couldn't ignore was a bigger question: why had Box 14 BIV vanished for 30 years? Martin Ellis, the warehouse technician, checked the storage log. Records showed the box was correctly placed in row 14B in 1990, but in 1998, during a shelf restructuring, it was misplaced. Not by error, but possibly misfiled during cleanup, a common issue in the pre-digital era. Oddly, in the years that followed, when Kate's file was reviewed in the 2000s, no one in the cold case unit knew this box existed. The 1998 inventory didn't even list 14B under available evidence. This meant Box 14B sat misfiled for 21 years, unseen, untouched, unknown to contain the case's most critical evidence. Had this box been properly analyzed in 1989, 1994, or 2002, the case could have taken a different path. But now, after 30 years, these 4 items weren't limited by outdated technology. With STR testing, skin cell analysis, mitochondrial DNA for the hair, and DNA extraction from the cigarette, all could yield results unimaginable in 1989. As Molina drafted the report to send the file to the forensic lab, he wrote a brief but pivotal line: the case's biggest turning point since Kate's disappearance. Evidence 14B recovered. Request full analysis. DNA priority. Kate Alder's case officially entered a new chapter for the first time in 3 decades. Forensics had something to work with, and for the first time, the truth wasn't buried in a forgotten cardboard box in a warehouse. When the 4 items from Box 14B reached the Texas DPS Forensic Lab, the cold case unit's atmosphere shifted entirely. What were once 1989 fragments, too small, too vague, too undefined for deduction, became potential DNA sources in an era where genetic analysis had surpassed all 1980s and 1990s limits. To modern forensic experts, a few centimeter hair, a dry cigarette butt, a denim scrap, or a sweat-stained tissue could hold thousands of biological molecules to reconstruct who was in 2A the night Kate vanished. The forensic team began with STR short tandem repeat analysis, the gold standard in criminal DNA testing. They opened the blonde hair bag, examined it under a microscope, and quickly confirmed it had a follicular tag, the root where living cells clung. This boosted DNA extraction chances significantly. After 3 decades, the hair still held stable DNA, thanks to Box 14B's dry, sunless, low-humidity storage. When the first STR results came back, the genetic markers were surprisingly clear and complete. The Marlboro light butt yielded even stronger data. The bite mark on the filter showed the smoker lightly clamped it, and under the charred paper, lip skin cells and saliva remained in the cellulose fibers. Forensics used a new generation extraction buffer, recovering DNA even from degraded samples. The genetic profile from the filter was not only complete, but matched the hair's profile. The denim fragment held skin cells and sweat, collected from its rough, torn surface, where dead cells often cling. But the strongest results came from the sweat-stained tissue, the richest biological sample of the 4. After over 30 years, it still held DNA sufficient for high-resolution STR analysis. When results from all 4 items were entered into CODIS, Combined DNA Index System, the team hoped to find a prior offender or individual in the national database. But surprisingly, no direct matches. In the 1990s, 2000s, DNA from minor crime arrestees wasn't logged in CODIS, and the system didn't include most non-arrested citizens. But 2020's forensics didn't stop at CODIS. They moved to genetic genealogy matching, a technique that cracked numerous high-profile cold cases. The DNA was uploaded to a specialized genealogical database, not public platforms like 23andMe or Ancestry, but a law enforcement version. Within hours, the system didn't identify an exact match, but a distant relative, a man in New Mexico, a third-degree genetic connection to the DNA. From there, genealogists built a family tree, cross-referencing 1980s Texas residency data, filtering by gender, age, Irving area, and specifically MacArthur Park Apartments. The result narrowed to one name, Mark Devereux. Forensics confirmed the STR profiles from all 4 items matched Mark at 9.998%, far exceeding the threshold for criminal identification. When the lab completed extended analysis, the official report stated, no DNA from any other building resident. All evidence matches Mark Devereux. This meant no Kate's DNA on the cigarette, no 2C neighbor's DNA, no 2D resident's DNA, no DNA from first or third floor residents, no DNA from the witness describing a woman like Kate, no DNA from anyone else in the building that night. Only Mark. Each item became an undeniable slice of the forensic picture. Blonde hair, didn't match Kate, matched Mark. Marlboro Light butt, second floor residents didn't smoke it, but Mark did, per later co-workers. Denim fragment, matched material typical of repairman's jeans. Sweat tissue, strongest DNA, fully matched Mark. Most critically, no item pointed to anyone else. No biological alibi, no third-party presence, no sign Kate touched the evidence. Only 2 people for forensics to consider, Kate Alder and Mark Devereux. And in the 4 items showing behavioral traces, cigarette, fabric, tissue, no Kate's DNA. This spoke a razor-sharp truth. The person on the staircase, at the balcony, leaving sweat, shedding hair, in Kate's apartment that night, was Mark. When the cold case unit received the lab report, doubt vanished. Molina placed it on the meeting table and said what no one expected to hear. After over 3 decades, we found him. He never left the building. From that moment, Kate Alder's case shifted from an unsolved disappearance to a crime with a clear suspect. DNA doesn't lie. And after 30 years, it pointed to the man next door, who left Irving in 1994, as if erasing his tracks, but left 4 tiny biological markers only modern forensics could see. The man who stayed in Irving, stood in the dark hallway, touched the sofa, pulled the balcony door, smoked a Marlboro Light in the narrow staircase, all bore one name, Mark Devereux. The investigation now wasn't about finding Kate, it was about tracking Mark and chasing the truth he'd buried for 35 years. The DNA results from Box 14B not only thrust Mark Devereux back into focus, but forced the cold case unit to consider that the 1989 2A-2B scene was never read correctly from the start. With modern forensics, Molina proposed a step unthinkable in 1989, re-examining the original building, especially structures replaced, repaired, or altered post-disappearance. By luck or fate, apartments 2A and 2B remained nearly unchanged. The building had changed owners 3 times, but the old units retained their original framework. But one 1994 report detail stood out. 2A's balcony had new paneling installed in 1990, after a storm rotted its wooden interior. Maintenance only noted degraded paneling, with no forensic thought. To Molina, the balcony's replacement the year after the disappearance raised a chilling possibility. If a struggle occurred there, evidence might have been sealed behind the old paneling. He immediately signed an order to re-examine the building's structure, something impossible in 1989 due to insufficient legal grounds. But now, with DNA matching Mark at 99.998%, the warrant was signed in under 4 hours. CSI began dismantling the balcony paneling. A 30-year buried process was finally being unearthed. The day the CSI team returned to apartment 2A, the atmosphere felt both chilling and solemn. No one knew what they'd find behind the wood replaced 3 decades ago, but all understood, this was no ordinary inspection. This was a forensic excavation. They started by removing each screw from the balcony's inner wooden panel. The 1990 replacement wood was relatively new, but the older panel beneath, encased rather than fully removed, remained, rotted but in place. CSI used scalpels, prying open each crevice as gray, damp dust slid to the floor, exposing the wooden frame and air gaps between old and new layers. When the first piece of old paneling was pulled away, the smell of decayed wood and years-old damp dust hit, forcing the team back a step. But as a flashlight beam swept inside, the first thing visible was a small dark green object caught in the frame's corner, like a thread snagged on a hook. 1. Denim fiber, a direct link tying Mark to the balcony. CSI used long tweezers to extract the item. It was a denim fiber, about 1 centimeter long, frayed at the edge. Unlike the denim fragment in box 14B, this was more faded, heavily dusted, indicating it predated the 1990 paneling. DNA testing wasn't immediate, but forensic fiber analysis determined this was worker-grade denim, the kind Mark Devereux wore as a drywall repairman. Double-twist cotton weave, 13 ounces thickness, exactly the type used in heavy-duty workers' jeans. No one else on the second floor in 1989 worked a job requiring similar pants. No one but Mark. The coincidence was no longer a coincidence. It was physical evidence proving Mark wasn't just on the staircase, at the balcony door, or in the apartment. He was involved in something at the balcony panel itself. 2. Sharp-edged stain, likely from a metal or pointed object. As another panel section was removed, a CSI called out, "There's an odd stain here." Under the old wood near the balcony frame's left edge was a 6 centimeter stain. Not water damage, not mold. It had a slightly concave surface, sharp edges, a clear sign of a hard, pointed or metal-edged object striking it forcefully. Technicians measured the stain's height from the balcony floor, at an adult's hip or fist level. If a struggle occurred, this could be where the perpetrator used an elbow, tool, or sharp object to brace while subduing Kate. In drywall repair, Mark carried tools like plaster knives, screws, or trowels, all capable of leaving such a sharp stain if struck against wood. Forensics compared the stain to the edge of a 1988 plaster knife, common among Irving workers then. Result: the knife edge's curvature matched the stain's concavity by 80%. This meant, not only did the panel show an impact, the object was likely a tool from Mark's trade. 3. Scratches on the wooden frame, a signature of a covert struggle. As the final panel section was removed, parallel scratches appeared. Not deep, not long, but numerous. CSI angled their lights and saw they were sliding marks, like fingernails or fingers scraping wood. The marks weren't large enough to suggest someone climbing over the railing, not long enough for a perpetrator's forceful grip, but enough for forensics to conclude these were scratches from a brief attempt to cling. The scratch pattern resembled marks from someone grasping in controlled panic, not violent thrashing, but desperate effort. A forensic expert described, "This is the type of scratch seen in attacks in small spaces, where the victim is pulled or silenced to avoid noise." Piecing it together, denim fiber workers' pants, stained metal tool, scratched covert struggle, 1990 panel replacement, possibly to hide clues. The entire balcony scene became a diagram of a struggle buried for 30 years. CSI expanded to apartment 2B. Not stopping at 2A, CSI immediately searched 2B, Mark's former home. Though it had seen multiple tenants, they found an old screw in the wall-to-ceiling gap, similar to those Mark used in 1989. The screw was slightly bent, a sign it was once used to brace or pry something. When forensics compared the screw's edge to the balcony frame's stain, the bent screw's curve matched the stain's concavity by 70%. This couldn't be coincidence. The forensic story was taking shape. In their internal report, CSI wrote, 2A's balcony panel contains traces of a small quiet struggle, impact linked to occupational tools, denim sample and DNA from box 14B, both tied to Mark Devereux. This is the first physical evidence proving Mark's presence at the impact site. And most crucially, no DNA, fabric or scratches belonged to Kate. This supported a chilling scenario. The person causing the impact fully controlled the scene, while the victim left no marks significant enough for 1980s forensics to detect. CSI's final assessment, as Molina compiled the report from DNA, panel, and new traces, he wrote, "A physical event occurred at 2A's balcony. The only person with consistent forensic presence, Mark Devereux." The 2A balcony, once a minor overlooked detail, became the epicenter of the entire truth. This was no longer a disappearance, not an adult voluntarily leaving, not a case without physical evidence. This was an attack, with a struggle, a perpetrator, traces, and a single individual tied to all evidence, and that person was Mark Devereux. After 35 years, the scene had spoken its truth. Now was the time to pursue the callous man who hid that truth next door for 3 decades. With forensics reconstructing the physical picture around 2A's balcony, Molina's next step was revisiting what seemed long dead, Mark Devereux's 1989 initial statement. If DNA, evidence, and the balcony panel pointed directly at Mark, his words from 30 years ago needed re-examination under a new light, modern forensic light. In the old file, Mark's statement spanned just 1.5 pages. He claimed he didn't leave his apartment that night, stayed home alone, watched TV, and slept before 10 p.m. No one corroborated it, but in that era, lacking alibi witnesses wasn't enough to establish guilt. Vaughn, the lead investigator then, deemed Mark's statement consistent with an adult disappearance case and let it pass without deep cross-examination. But in the 2020s, with DNA matching at 99.9998%, the claim, "I never stepped outside" became a critical statement, and the key to unraveling the deception. Molina decided to cross-check Mark's statement using cameras, something 1989 couldn't do effectively. The MacArthur Park Apartments archive still held partial VHS backup tapes from the old camera system, covering the main gate, rear entrance, and a courtyard angle monitoring the outdoor staircase. In 1989, the footage was too blurry to identify faces, but modern forensics could enhance brightness and scan motion with AI restoration. CSI reran the footage from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. on November 14, 1989. At 9:28 p.m., the rear courtyard camera captured a man in a denim jacket, walking along the outer hallway, heading up the staircase to the second floor. The image was grainy, but forensics boosted contrast, revealing denim with a reflective texture, identical to repairman's jackets and pants. The height, gait, and shoulder angle matched a former co-worker's description of Mark, a slight right lean from a minor shoulder injury. To forensics, this wasn't absolute proof, but to Molina, it was enough to revisit Mark's old statement and assess its truthfulness. Mark said in 1989, "I didn't leave my apartment that night," but the camera showed a denim-clad figure heading toward the likely 2A, 2B area at the time forensics pegged for a possible struggle. The moment Mark was summoned back, when police contacted Mark in 2019 during the cold case reinvestigation, he was living in Oklahoma City, married, in a new trade, and barely mentioned his Irving past. When called in, he appeared calm, even indifferent, like someone thinking that old matter is done. The first question Molina asked, "Do you stand by your 1989 statement that you didn't leave apartment 2B that night?" Mark answered without blinking, "Yes, I didn't go anywhere." Molina placed a printout of the enhanced 1989 camera image on the table. The figure in denim was blurry, but the gait and height were unmistakably similar to Mark's, impossible to dismiss. Mark looked at it, and for the first time since entering the room, he hesitated. Molina pressed, "Are you sure this isn't you?" Mark avoided direct eye contact, a psychological tell an experienced investigator could spot instantly, the reaction of someone searching for an explanation, not someone telling the truth. After a few seconds of silence, Mark said, Maybe I stepped out briefly. I don't remember clearly. It's been 30 years." This was the first time in 30 years Mark altered his statement, breaking the consistency he'd used to conceal the truth since 1989. Molina noted, subject changed statement when confronted with camera footage. High probability deception. A witness returns after 30 years, trembling words but a key. The biggest shock came from someone unexpected. Linda Vexler, the former resident of the end-of-hallway apartment on the second floor in 1989. She was the third witness in the 1989 file, but her statement was lost, surviving only as a torn, blurry photocopy. When the cold case hit local news in 2019, after forensics announced expanded DNA analysis, Linda contacted police, requesting to provide her statement again. In the meeting, clutching her purse with trembling hands, she spoke clearly. I heard a woman scream, very brief, like a no, right outside apartment 2B. Melina asked, why didn't you report this in 1989? Linda's voice broke. I was scared. I lived alone. The man in 2B, his look made me afraid to say anything. I've regretted it for 30 years. Her words silenced the room. A small scream. Location outside 2B. Exactly where forensics found struggle scratches, timing within the 9:30 p.m. window, matching the denim figure on camera. The man she feared, Mark Devereux. This statement was the final piece completing the event chain. Forensic DNA. Mark Devereux. Mark denim fragment. Mark Devereux. Mark denim fragment. Mark Devereux. Sweat tissue. Mark Devereux. Scragment. Fallen K panel. Physical impact. Camera. Denim figure at the right time. 2019 witness. Brief. Female scream. Mark's statement. Change inconsistent. No room left for coincidence. Mark was tightening the noose around himself. When confronted with Linda's statement, Mark showed classic signs of someone cornered, repeatedly asking for questions to be repeated, blaming a fading memory over time, denying, then partially admitting, avoiding specific timelines, saying things like, I don't remember, maybe I stepped out briefly, but I didn't cause any trouble. But forensics didn't need his confession, they only needed his contradictions, and Mark provided them. Melina noted in the investigation report, when cross-referenced with camera footage, subject altered original statement, combined with forensic evidence, strong indication of involvement. The final push, forensics speaks for the truth. As the interrogation ended, Melina reopened the 9:28 p.m. camera image and placed it beside the 4 items from box 14B. He concluded, you said you didn't leave your apartment, but you were in the hallway, and your DNA was in apartment 2A. No one else's, only yours. Mark fell silent, eyes fixed on his hands, not a silence of protest, but the silence of someone with no way out. The forensic, witness, and camera net had closed, and for the first time in 30 years, every trace pointed to one spot, the door of apartment 2B, where Mark stood on November 14, 1989, where a small scream rang out, and where Kate Alder was last seen in the building's silence. Part 17 ends with a suffocating feeling. The truth no longer belonged to memory, but to what Mark left behind. Whether the smallest fabric trace, the faintest footstep, or the trembling statement of a woman too scared to speak for 30 years, the circle was closing, and it was closing on Mark Devereux. The Irving Police Department's interrogation room was bathed in neutral white light, not too bright to dazzle, but enough to leave no dark corner for the truth to hide. Mark Devereux sat on a metal chair, hands clasped, thumbs fidgeting, a telltale sign of stress he couldn't mask. Before him, Melina placed a thick white folder on the table, containing every forensic result printed in crisp pages. For the first time in 3 decades, what Mark left that night was gathered in one small room, no longer in the shadows of an anonymous warehouse. Melina began with the softest question possible. Are you sure you want to stick with your old statement? Mark swallowed hard. As I said, I don't remember clearly. It's been 30 years. Melina didn't argue. He opened the first evidence bag, and placed a clear plastic pouch containing the blonde hair on the table. 1. Forensics confronts Mark. The blonde hair, Melina said. Kate had chestnut hair, not blonde. No one in the building had blonde hair. This was found under the sofa base in 2A. Forensics determined, STR profile matches you. Mark stared at the hair in the bag, as if seeing it for the first time. He tried to keep his voice steady. I might have stopped by. Like I said, I don't remember clearly. This was the first concession. Before he insisted he never left the apartment. Now faced with forensic truth, his story began shifting in ways he could no longer control. Melina didn't react. He opened the second evidence bag. 2. The Marlboro Light cigarette butt. Inside the plastic was a partially burned cigarette, its filter bearing a bite mark, clearly showing the lower jaw's slight curve. You told investigators in 1989 you didn't smoke, but your old co-workers at the Dallas site said you smoked Marlboro Lights daily. Mark furrowed his brow, lips tightening into a line. I quit ages ago. I don't remember what I said back then. Molina tilted his head. This butt was collected on the staircase, just below 2A. Forensics says the DNA matches your sample. Kate didn't smoke. No one on the second floor smoked Marlboro Lights. Mark swallowed, his throat visibly moving. He knew the forensic noose was tightening bit by bit. 3. The denim fragment. Molina pulled out the third bag, a dark blue denim scrap, frayed at the edge, the thick 13 ounces weave typical of 1980s workers' jeans. This was collected at the balcony door track. How do you explain it? Mark paused, then answered. I sometimes wore work clothes home. I don't remember being near the balcony. Molina leaned forward. Forensics on the balcony panel found another denim fiber caught in the wood frame. We have two pieces, one from 1989, one from the old panel removed last year. Both are the same denim type, and the micro-DNA on the main piece matches. Mark looked down. His chest rose and fell slightly. He knew the fabric wasn't something that could innocently end up in someone else's apartment. Molina asked the first direct question. Were you in apartment 2A, on the night of November 14, 1989? Mark stayed silent. The silence lasted exactly 7 seconds, long enough for a seasoned investigator like Molina to conclude. This was the silence of someone weighing whether to change their story. Finally Mark said, I might have stopped by. Molina set his pen down. Be specific. Mark faltered, sweating. I met Kate. Yes, I met her, but it wasn't anything serious. This was the most critical moment since the case reopened. Mark Devereux admitted for the first time to meeting Kate the night she vanished. In forensics this is called the first admission point, the moment a suspect breaks their old denial. 4. Forensics' final weapon, the sweat tissue. Molina knew Mark was wavering. Now was the time to deploy the strongest evidence. He pulled out the final bag, the sweat-stained tissue. DNA in this tissue, 100% match to you. No other person's sample, no Kate's sample. Mark opened his mouth, but couldn't speak. Molina continued. This was found at the balcony door, where forensics found signs of a light struggle, where a witness heard a small scream. Mark's hands trembled. The confrontation turned psychological. Molina shifted tone. No longer cold forensics, now targeting psychological weakness. You say you met Kate, but your DNA is on the staircase, on the balcony, on the tissue, on the cigarette, on the denim. While Kate's DNA isn't on any evidence, you didn't just meet her. You were at the struggle scene. Mark abruptly stood from his chair. I didn't do anything. I just talked to her. Molina, still calm, said, then why did she disappear? Mark clenched his hands. I don't know, Molina replied. You know. Mark began to crumble, his words shifting rapidly. Mark's voice broke. She came knocking. No, I went to see her. I just wanted to ask her, neighbor stuff. We talked a few minutes. That's it, Molina asked. Then why was there a struggle on the balcony? Mark stammered. No, I don't know. Maybe she tripped. Molina, no skid marks. No Kate's fingerprints. Your prints are there. Mark trembled. I don't remember what happened after. Molina locked eyes. You remember, you always remembered. You just don't want to say. The moment Mark broke a long silence, so prolonged even the surveillance camera seemed to hold its breath. Finally Mark said, I met Kate. That's all I can say. Molina understood this was a limited admission, the kind from someone who knows forensics is closing in, but still tries to preserve legal wiggle room. But Molina didn't need a full confession. He only needed Mark's defenses to crack, piece by piece, and forensics had done that. Walk Siston. Cigarette, Mark Siston. Denim figure at 9:28 p.m. Siston. Witness scream outside 2B Siston. Mark's statements changed multiple times. Siston. The truth was emerging. Not through a complete confession, but through each point Mark could no longer deny. Mark sat down, his shoulders slumping, as if he'd just endured a fierce internal battle. He didn't confess fully, didn't recount the entire night, but he admitted what he'd denied for 3 decades. "I met Kate that night." It was the first brick of a confession, though incomplete, and with forensics, one exposed brick was enough for the wall of lies to start cracking from within. Molina closed the interrogation file. "We'll talk again. And next time, you won't have room to dodge." In the week following the final interrogation, Molina and the investigative team worked nearly sleeplessly. What forensics had built: DNA, denim, cigarette butt, sweat tissue, struggle marks on the panel, 9:28 p.m. camera, witness testimony, and Mark's contradictory statements, was enough to construct a solid case. This was no longer a vague disappearance. This was a crime with a clear suspect, concealed by 1989's procedural errors and Mark's 30-year silence. Texas law allowed prosecution without a body, when forensics and a suspect's deceptive behavior met the beyond reasonable doubt standard. And in Kate Alder's case, every forensic piece converged on one direction: Mark Devereux. On the 8th day, the district attorney's office signed the order, arrest warrant. Mark Allen Devereux charge: murder first degree based on cumulative forensic evidence and deceptive conduct. That night, Molina held the arrest warrant. At the top, the words Irving 1989 cold case, cut through 35 years of history. Mark was found in Denton, Texas, 56 years old, living quietly, as if nothing had happened. Mark left Irving in 1994, lived in Oklahoma, then returned to Texas around 2010, settling in a small house in Denton's suburbs. Neighbors described him as reserved, an early riser, driving an old pickup to home repair jobs. A man so ordinary, he was invisible. That invisibility had protected him for 30 years. But forensics didn't forget. DNA didn't forget. The balcony panel didn't forget. The 2019 witness didn't forget. And Mark's calculation, hiding behind ordinariness, ultimately failed. The arrest took place at 6:42 a.m. on a cold Denton morning. 2 Irving PD cars, with Denton County Sheriff's support, parked outside Mark's house. He stepped out the back door after a knock, still in an old gray-green painter's shirt, holding a steaming coffee mug. Molina approached, warrant in hand. "Mark Devereux, you're under arrest for the murder of Kate Alder per Dallas County Court order." Mark stood still, no resistance, no surprise. Only a strange expression crossed his face, as if he'd long awaited this moment, not because he wanted to be caught, but because he knew forensic truth would eventually find him. Molina read his rights. As cuffs locked around Mark's wrists, he turned to look directly at Molina, his gaze cold but not hostile. Then he spoke, voice low, steady, unshaken. "She didn't walk out. That's all I'll say." The brief words landed like a stone. Not a full confession, not an explanation, not an apology, just the most critical admission since 1989. Kate didn't leave her apartment voluntarily. Mark had denied it for 30 years. Now, with forensics exposing him, he offered only this single line, both an admission and a burial of the final truth. The moment of escort, Mark was led to the patrol car. Neighbors watched silently, some recording, others asking, "What's going on?" But no one answered. This was a cold case from another era, a disappearance most in Denton had never heard of. Mark sat in the car, head slightly bowed, cuffed wrists resting on his lap. He said nothing more, no questions, no requests, no protests. It was the demeanor of a man who knew it was over, that forensics had traced its way back to a small second-floor apartment in MacArthur Park Apartments, across 3 decades. Back to Irving, where it all began. As the police car passed the "Welcome to Irving" sign, Molina opened the final report draft for the DA. DNA from 4-item marked denim fiber, marked denim fiber, marked cigarette butt, marked sweat tissue, marked 2, marked 2. A panel struggle marks matched Mark's trade tools. 9:28 p.m. camera denim clad figure, height consistent with Mark's. Mark's statement changed, contradictory. 2019 witness small scream outside 2B. No DNA from any other resident, no evidence Kate left the building. All pointed one way. Mark was taken to a temporary holding cell. As Molina walked away, Mark said one final thing not to fight the charge, but as a last defense, I met her. But I didn't mean for anything to happen. But forensics didn't care about intent. The law didn't hinge on I didn't mean to. The truth had been reconstructed, through DNA, through balcony traces, through cameras, through Mark's own statements he couldn't hold together. After 35 years, the final circle closed, and Mark Devereux, the man who lived next to Kate Alder, was finally cuffed and brought back to where the truth was left in 1989. The Dallas County courtroom was packed that morning. Local reporters crowded through the old wooden doors, while former MacArthur Park Apartments residents from the 80s and 90s sat silently in the back rows. For 35 years, Kate Alder's disappearance had been a faint mark on Texas's crime map, but when Mark Devereux was led and handcuffed, the 3-decade silence turned into a tense wave. This wasn't an ordinary case. This was a no-body homicide, a murder without a body. And such cases could only stand in court if the prosecution proved the victim could not be alive, and the suspect was the last person with her, with conduct inexplicable except as criminal. The jury seats filled, their eyes turned to the lead prosecutor, Rachel Simmons, known for her razor-sharp forensic presentations. On her table were stacks of documents, balcony panel photos, denim fragments, DNA charts, and a 3D model of 2A. Across from her, defense attorney Richard Davin, silver-haired and stern, had his ready line, one he knew would echo often, "No body, no murder." But Simmons gave a faint smile as the trial began, as if she'd long anticipated that line. The courtroom lights dimmed, as a technician activated a 3D model reconstructing apartment 2A with modern technology. A steady voice narrated, "This is the apartment where Kate Alder was last seen on the night of November 14, 1989. No one saw her leave. No camera recorded her exiting. No bank transactions. No calls. No evidence she was alive after 8:12 p.m. The screen shifted from the front door to the living room, the sofa misaligned, its leg indentations overlapping in 2 layers, simulating the micro-displacement forensics confirmed could only result from rapid furniture movement, not homeowner rearrangement. Then the model zoomed to the balcony door track, where the Marlboro light butt was found, the denim fragment collected, the sweat-stained tissue left behind. Next, it reconstructed the balcony corner with the old wooden panel, crescent-shaped stain, concave mark, likely from a metal object, parallel scratches, location of the caught denim fiber, door opening direction, mismatched with the November 14, 1989 wind. Simmons stood, hand resting lightly on the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, these traces weren't caused by time, not by maintenance. This is the pattern of a brief, covert struggle, lasting seconds." Some in the courtroom held their breath. The prosecution's first witness was Dr. Helena Cruz, a forensic DNA expert with Texas DPS. She outlined each step. 1. DNA e-cigarette butt, 100% match to Mark Devereux. Tissue 100% match to Mark denim fragment, contained Mark's microcellular DNA. Blonde hair mitochondrial DNA matched Mark's mother. No item bore the victim's DNA, Dr. Cruz concluded, and no item contained DNA from any other resident. The defense attorney jumped up. "No victim's DNA means no murder." Dr. Cruz turned her head slightly. "No, sir, it only means the victim didn't touch the evidence. The perpetrator left the traces." Whispers rippled through the courtroom. 2. Scene forensics. Cruz's next presentation gripped the jury. Sofa displacement marks, wall impact consistent with a man's height, scratches resembling desperate grasping in a struggle, balcony door opening, against the wind direction. Old balcony panel with impact marks matching a drywaller's tools. Cruz said, "These form a physical event chain that the Kate left voluntarily version cannot explain." Attorney Davin stood, stepping close to the jury. "No body, no blood, no confession, no direct witness. Forensics only say Mr. Devereux was there, but they don't prove a death." Then he locked eyes with the jury, as if hammering home, "Kate's absence doesn't equal murder." But Simmons was ready. She turned to the screen, showing the 9:28 p.m. camera footage, a denim-clad figure climbing the stairs. He said he didn't leave his apartment. The camera says otherwise. She displayed the timeline. 8:12 p.m. Kate entered the building. 9 o'clock. 9:20 p.m. Unusual sounds outside. 2B 9:28 p.m. Denim figure on the stairs. No one saw Kate leave the building. Mark changed his statement 3 times. The courtroom began to grasp. No body was needed. Only Mark appeared at every critical timeline point. Linda Wexler was called. Her voice trembled, but was clear. I heard a woman's small scream. Very brief. Right outside apartment 2B, the defense interrupted. You didn't report this in 1989. Why speak now? Linda looked down, then up. Because I was afraid of him, and I was wrong to stay silent. The courtroom fell silent, as Simmons asked, did the voice sound like Kate's? Linda clutched her hands. I'm not sure, but I'm certain it wasn't a happy sound. It was pain. Simmons returned to the podium, her gaze sharp as a forensic scalpel. We have Mark's DNA on the balcony, Mark's DNA on the cigarette, Mark's DNA on the sweat tissue, Mark's denim fragment, struggle marks, camera capturing Mark's figure, a witness hearing a scream, Mark's changing statements, no evidence Kate left the building, no bank activity, no phone calls, no signs of life for 35 years. Then she lowered her voice, but her words rang like a gavel. A body isn't required to prove a crime when forensics behavior and physical truth speak in unison. She looked at the jury. This case doesn't lack a body. This case has enough evidence. Davin made his final rebuttal. Mr. Devereux only admitted to meeting Kate. That doesn't make him a murderer. Simmons smiled coldly. No sir, forensics make him a murderer, and he knows it. The jury left the room. Mark sat motionless. He didn't look at his wife. Didn't look at anyone. In that moment, someone in the courtroom heard Mark mutter. She didn't walk out. She didn't, but he said no more. No one knew exactly what happened on November 14, 1989. But forensics knew. The evidence knew. The balcony door knew. And now, the jury knew. The courtroom was nearly silent when the jury returned after nearly 8 hours of deliberation. No one spoke. No one moved. Those who'd followed Kate Alder's case for 30 years, family, friends, former MacArthur Park neighbors, knew this moment wasn't just a court verdict, but a reckoning of 1989's errors, a broken line reconnected after 3 decades. The jury stood. The foreperson held a trembling white paper. The judge asked, on the charge of murder in the first degree, have you reached a verdict? The foreperson replied, voice firm. We find the defendant guilty. The courtroom held its breath. On the charge of kidnapping, what is your verdict? Guilty. In that instant, all sound seemed to vanish. Then, slowly, a sigh rose from the back row, a sigh holding 30 years of pent-up weight. A woman sobbed. A man covered his face. Strangers bowed their heads, sharing a collective loss. A disappearance Irving, once deemed non-suspicious in 1989, was now redefined by one word: murder. Mark Devereux stood motionless as the verdict was read. No tears, no resistance, no plea for mercy. When the judge asked if he had final words before sentencing, Mark said only one thing: not to beg forgiveness, but to reassure himself of a truth he perhaps never wanted to face. I didn't mean for it to go that far. But forensics, behavior, the timeline, and 30 years of silence proved otherwise. The final sentencing. The judge declared, life sentence for murder in the first degree, additional 40 years for kidnapping. The sentences to run consecutively, meaning Mark would never leave prison. No body, no full confession, but a clear truth. Kate Alder didn't walk out of 2A, and Mark was the last person with her. After the verdict, Kate Alder's case quickly became a textbook example in police and forensic training across Texas, Dallas County, and even federal programs. The Irving 1989 cold case. How small mistakes create a 30-year blackout. They analyzed each point. 1989's failure to mark the case as foul play. Lost witness statements. Cigarette butt excluded from evidence logs. Balcony panel replaced without forensic examination. Mark's statement not cross-checked with cameras, despite their existence. No microforensic analysis. In the 1980s file, not properly reviewed until 2002, the 68-page Texas DPS summary report stated, Kate Alder's case wasn't the failure of one person, it was the failure of an era's system. But that same modern system, with forensic DNA, genealogical matching, and structural scene analysis, brought the truth back. As Mark was led away, the courtroom erupted in mixed emotions, but one person stood silently at the exit, investigator Sam Rourke, who reopened the file in 2002. He didn't pat anyone's shoulder or celebrate victory. He only looked at the verdict on the table and whispered, as if to himself, justice is never clean. Sometimes, it's just less incomplete, because even though the jury convicted Mark, even though forensics reconstructed every step in 2A, even though DNA pinpointed the perpetrator, one truth never emerged. Kate Alder's body was still missing. Not in Joe Pool Lake, not in Capel Woods, not in Irving's 1989 vacant lots, not in any excavated area. Mark never revealed its location. When the prosecution asked why, Mark only said, "Some things need to stay where they are." The words were both cruel and a surrender. For Kate's family, the verdict was both solace and new pain. They knew the killer was caught. They knew forensics uncovered the truth, but they still had no place to lay a flower. At MacArthur Park Apartments, a small plaque was erected under the staircase, in memory of Kate Alder, missing but never forgotten. New residents read her name, unaware the place they lived once witnessed a silent struggle, a moment lasting seconds, that erased a 27-year-old woman's life. Though resolved in court, Kate Alder's case left a silent void in Irving PD's files, a void no verdict, forensics or DNA could fill. That void was where was she for 35 years? What did Mark do after the balcony struggle? Who was the last to hear Kate's voice? What happened in the 8 minutes no one witnessed? There were no answers. Only investigator Terry Molina's words, standing by a glass door looking at Dallas at dusk, sunlight spilling like golden dust. Cold cases don't sleep. They wait. Kate Alder's case never slept. It waited 35 years to be seen, and it still waits, for the day the final piece where Kate rests is found. Kate Alder's story isn't just a true crime case, but a stark reflection of American life today, a society with a powerful legal and technological system, yet sometimes a chain of subjectivity, delays and silence can bury justice for 35 years. In 1989, police saw 2A's no blood, no broken furniture, and filed it as missing adult non-suspicious. The balcony panel with scratches, dents, denim, and the misplaced box 14B all showed that dismissing small details can cost a lifetime. The lesson for Americans today is don't ignore your instincts. Neighbor Linda heard a small scream outside 2B, but was too scared to speak, only to weep 30 years later. I've regretted it for 30 years. If you hear a cry for help, see something odd in an apartment, parking lot, or dorm hallway, report it, document it, stand with the victim, even if maybe I'm wrong. The lesson for families is keep asking questions. If a loved one who never misses work, never stops calling, suddenly vanishes, don't accept they probably left as closure. The lesson for communities and systems is invest in cold cases, forensics and evidence storage, DNA, 3D apartment analysis, and the persistence of later investigators exposed Mark Devereux, who thought he'd lived normally, in Denton. The phrase cold cases don't sleep, they wait, reminds us that truth and justice may come late, but only if everyone in society speaks up, remembers, and refuses to let small screams be swallowed by silence. If you want to follow more humane investigations and costly lessons from cold cases like Kate Alder's, please subscribe to the channel to stay updated. Thank you for joining, and we'll meet again in the next video, where justice, though late, always has its own voice.